They ignored his hay bale ambush until it broke a German offensive in one night, December 1944. A Belgian field at night, rain tapping on frozen hay. Somewhere in the fog, engines are grinding closer. 40 vehicles, 500 German soldiers rolling toward a hill defended by 18 Americans. Division headquarters says this sector is quiet. The maps say nothing is coming. But the farm kid crouched behind a hay bale knows the maps are wrong. And in the next few hours, a trick his own officers called stupid will be the only thing standing between a German breakthrough and an open road into the Allied rear. This is the Ardennes. The Americans call it the Ghost Front. 80 miles of forest and frozen ridgelines where nothing is supposed to happen. The logic makes sense on paper. The terrain is brutal. The roads are narrow. No sane commander would push an armored offensive through here. So the army uses it as a rest area. Broken divisions get sent here to recover. Green units get sent here to learn. Everyone else gets told the same thing. Hold the line. Stay alert. Don't expect trouble. The trouble with the Ghost Front is that it's not a front at all. It's a suggestion. A line on a map so thin that a single platoon might be responsible for a mile of terrain. There are gaps between units wide enough to drive a convoy through. The officers know this. They also know there's nothing they can do about it. Every spare rifle is somewhere else, the real war, the important war, the war that matters. The Ardennes is an afterthought. And somewhere in that afterthought, on a ridge overlooking a frozen field, 18 men are dug in along a tree line. Their position is a joke. A few foxholes, a handful of machine guns, a radio that works when it feels like it. Their job is to watch a road that nobody expects the Germans to use. Their orders are simple: observe, report, hold until relieved. No one has told them when relief is coming. No one seems to think it matters. The sergeant doesn't look like much. 22 years old, maybe 23. Thin face, chapped hands. The kind of permanent squint you get from years of staring across flat country. He grew up on a farm in Kansas. Wheat and cattle, long summers throwing hay bales onto wagons. Winters fixing equipment that was older than he was. He didn't finish high school, didn't need to. Everything he knew, he learned from the land and from his father. A man who believed that problems were just situations that hadn't met the right tool yet. Now he's 6,000 miles from Kansas, crouched in a foxhole that smells like wet earth and cold metal, watching his breath fog in the dark. He's been in the Army long enough to stop being surprised by the things the Army gets wrong. But this feels different. This feels like the moment before a barn collapses. That silence, where everything looks fine and nothing is. He's seen things the past few days that don't match what they're being told. Flickers of light in the trees across the valley. Engine noise at odd hours. Tracks in the mud that weren't there yesterday. Small things, easy to dismiss. Except he's a farm kid, and farm kids learn early that small things are how you stay alive. You notice the hawk circling before you lose a chicken. You hear the change in the wind before the storm hits. You pay attention, because the land doesn't care if you believe it or not. 7 miles behind him, in a requisitioned farmhouse with a fire going and coffee on the stove, a different kind of meeting is happening. Regimental staff, division liaisons, men with clean uniforms and maps that haven't seen mud. The maps show the Ghost Front as a series of neat lines, units represented by little rectangles, positions marked with confident symbols. The rectangle that represents the sergeant's platoon is so small it barely has a name. The briefing is routine, intelligence assessment. German forces in the sector are depleted, defensive, unlikely to attempt anything larger than reconnaissance patrols. Recommendation: maintain current posture. Conserve resources for the winter. Priority sectors are to the north and south. The Ardennes is not a priority. Someone asks about the reports coming in from forward units, the scattered observations, the engine noise, the flickers. An officer shrugs. Nervous troops. Green units jumping at shadows. It happens. The meeting moves on. Back on the ridge, the sergeant is standing at the edge of his foxhole, looking out at the field below. Hay bales dot the frozen ground, left over from a harvest that feels like it happened in a different world. He stares at them for a long time. Then he walks back to his position and starts thinking. The first report goes up the chain 2 days before the attack. The sergeant has been watching the tree line across the valley, and he doesn't like what he's seeing. Movement at dusk. Too organized for animals. Too deliberate for wind. He mentions it to his lieutenant, a young officer from somewhere in Connecticut who's been in country for 3 months and still looks like he's waiting for someone to tell him what to do. The lieutenant listens, writes it down, sends it up the chain. The response comes back the next morning. Probably friendly units repositioning. No cause for concern. Continue to observe. The sergeant reads the message and says nothing. That night, he watches again. More movement. Lights that shouldn't be there. The faint sound of metal on metal. The kind of sound a tank makes when it's trying to be quiet and failing. He reports again. This time he's specific. Possible armored vehicles. Possible staging activity. Possible large-scale movement. The response is shorter this time. Your sector is not a priority. Maintain position. Avoid unnecessary radio traffic. He reads it twice. Then he folds the paper and puts it in his pocket. He doesn't throw it away. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he's already thinking about what happens after. About who's going to want to know what they were told and when. The third night, he stops reporting. There's no point. The men at headquarters have decided what's happening, and nothing from the front is going to change their minds. He's watched this before, in smaller ways. Officers who knew things because they'd read them in a manual. Farmers who lost crops because they trusted the almanac more than the sky. Some people can't learn from what they see. They can only learn from what they already believe. So he stops talking to headquarters. And he starts thinking about hay. The bales are everywhere, scattered across the field below his position, frozen into the mud, ignored by everyone. They've been sitting there since autumn, slowly rotting, too heavy to move and too worthless to collect. The Germans will walk right past them, drive right past them. They're just part of the landscape, dead farm country. Nothing to see, unless they're not. The idea comes to him the way most of his ideas come. Not as a flash, but as a slow recognition. He's spent half his life working with hay. He knows what it can hide. He knows how to stack it, how to hollow it, how to make it look solid when it's not. A hay bale is just geometry, mass and space. And if you know what you're doing, you can put a lot of things inside that space. Things like a machine gun, a man with a rifle, an observation post that looks like nothing at all. He runs the numbers in his head. The field is a natural choke point, one road, soft ground on either side, no easy way around. If the Germans come through here, they'll come through on that road. And if they come through on that road, they'll pass within 50 yards of those hay bales. 50 yards, point-blank range for an MG. Close enough to see the whites of their eyes, his father would have said. He takes the idea to the lieutenant the next morning, explains it simply. We hollow out the bales. We cut firing slits. We put 2, maybe 3 machine guns inside, positioned to cover the road. When the column comes through, we let them get close, really close. And then we open up from positions they never knew existed. By the time they figure out what's happening, half the lead vehicles are burning and the rest are stuck behind them. The lieutenant stares at him. For a moment, the sergeant thinks he might actually be considering it. Then, the lieutenant shakes his head. That's not how we do things, Sergeant. There are procedures, approved positions, fields of fire that have been calculated and logged. We can't just start building. What, scarecrow forts? In the middle of a field because you have a feeling. The sergeant tries again. Sir, if they come in force, our current positions won't hold. We don't have the men. We don't have the ammunition. But if we can hit them from where they're not looking, If we can buy even a few hours. The lieutenant cuts him off. I said no. And if I hear you've been out there modifying anything without authorization, I'll write you up myself. We're soldiers, Sergeant, not farmers. Start acting like it. The sergeant stands there for a moment. Then he salutes and walks away. He doesn't argue, doesn't push. There's no point. The lieutenant has made a decision, and men like the lieutenant don't unmake decisions. It would mean admitting they were wrong, and that's not something the Army teaches. But the sergeant is still a farm kid, and farm kids know that sometimes you don't ask permission. Sometimes you just do what needs doing and deal with the consequences after. That night, after dark, he grabs too many trusts and heads for the field. The field is quieter than it should be. No wind, no insects, just the sound of frozen grass crunching under boots, and the distant hum of something mechanical too far away to identify. The sergeant moves low, keeping to the shadows at the edge of the tree line. 2 men behind him. Kowalski, a rifleman from Chicago who talks too much but never hesitates. And Denny, a kid from North Carolina who barely speaks at all, but can strip and rebuild a machine gun faster than anyone in the platoon. They don't ask questions. They know why they're out here. They've been watching the same tree line, hearing the same engines, reading the same dismissals from headquarters. When the sergeant pulled them aside and said he needed help with something that might get them all court-martialed, neither one blinked. The first bale is 20 yards from the road. Chest high, frozen solid on the outside, packed tight enough to stop a pistol round. The sergeant circles it once, checking sight lines, measuring angles in his head. Then he pulls out his knife and starts cutting. The work is brutal. Hay that's been sitting in a Belgian winter doesn't want to move. His hands are bleeding within the first hour, straw splinters buried deep in his palms, but he keeps going. Hollow out the center. Leave the walls thick enough to look solid from outside. Cut a slot at chest height, wide enough for a muzzle, narrow enough to miss at a glance. Pack sandbags along the base for stability. Make sure there's room for a man to crouch inside without his helmet showing over the top. Kowalski works on the second bale, 30 yards to the left. Denny preps the third, positioned to catch anyone who tries to flank the road. They communicate in gestures. A pointed finger, a nod, a quick shake of the head. No talking. Sound carries in cold air, and they have no idea who might be listening. By midnight, the sergeant's hands are raw and his back is screaming. He's hollowed out 2 bales and helped finish a third. 3 positions. 3 machine guns. If they can get them in place without the lieutenant noticing, it's not enough to stop an army, but it might be enough to make them bleed. He crouches inside the first bale, testing the fit. The space is cramped, dark, and smells like rotting vegetation. Through the firing slit, he can see the road perfectly. A pale strip of frozen mud cutting through the field, wide enough for vehicles, narrow enough to become a death trap if something blocks it. He imagines a convoy rolling through, headlights in the fog. The first truck passing, then the second, then the third. The moment when he opens fire, and the driver realizes too late that the hay bales aren't empty. He allows himself a small smile. Then he climbs out and gets back to work. The hardest part isn't the digging. It's getting the guns in place. They can't move the MGs during daylight. Too visible, too many questions. So they wait until the next night, an hour after sunset, and carry the weapons down piece by piece. Receiver, barrel, tripod, ammo boxes. Each trip is a risk. Each shadow could be an officer doing rounds. Each noise could be the thing that ends this before it starts. Kowalski almost drops a tripod crossing a frozen stream. The sound of metal hitting ice echoes across the field like a gunshot. They freeze, hearts pounding, waiting for a shout, a flashlight, anything. Nothing comes. They keep moving. By the time they're finished, it's almost dawn. 3 hay bales, 3 machine guns, overlapping fields of fire covering the road and the open ground on either side. From 50 yards, you can't tell anything's different. The bales look exactly like they've looked for months. Dead, forgotten, part of the scenery. The sergeant stands at the edge of the tree line, looking at his work. Denny comes up beside him, breathing hard, hands shoved in his pockets for warmth. "You really think they're coming?" Denny says. "Not a question. Just checking." The sergeant doesn't look at him. "Yeah, I think they're coming." Denny nods. "Then I guess we'll find out if hay stops bullets." The sergeant almost laughs. "That's not the plan. The hay doesn't stop anything. It just makes them think there's nothing there. By the time they figure out they're wrong, we've already killed the first wave. And after that," the sergeant shrugs. "After that, we run like hell and hope the foxholes hold." They walk back to their positions in silence. The lieutenant is asleep. The radio is quiet. Somewhere to the east, the sky is just starting to lighten, and the sergeant can feel it in his bones. That same feeling he used to get before a bad storm, when the animals got restless and the air tasted like metal. Something's coming, something big, and now, for better or worse, he's ready. 7 miles behind the front, the morning briefing begins the same way it always does. Coffee, cigarettes, a map spread across a farmhouse table that still has crumbs from the family who lived here before the war pushed them out. The officers gather around it like priests around an altar, studying the little symbols that represent men and machines, as if staring hard enough might reveal something new. The intelligence picture hasn't changed. German forces in the Ardennes remain depleted. Morale is assessed as low. Supply lines are stretched. The enemy is capable of limited defensive operations but lacks the strength for anything more ambitious. This assessment has been true for weeks. It will remain true until the moment it isn't. Someone mentions the reports from forward units, the scattered observations that keep trickling in, engine noise, movement in the trees, lights where there shouldn't be lights. A captain from the intelligence section waves it off. "We're getting the same thing up and down the line," he says. "Green troops, bad weather, long nights." Men start seeing things. It doesn't mean anything. Another officer frowns. "What about the patrol that went missing near Losheim?" The captain shrugs. "Probably walked into their own minefield. It happens. We'll sort it out when things calm down." The conversation moves on. Logistics. Supply schedules. The upcoming rotation that will pull one exhausted unit out and push another exhausted unit in. Nobody talks about the possibility that the Germans might actually do something. The idea doesn't fit the assessment, so the idea doesn't exist. On the ridge, the sergeant is watching the same sunrise through different eyes. He hasn't slept in 30 hours. His hands are wrapped in dirty bandages where the straw tore them open. But he's awake in a way that goes beyond tired. That sharp electric alertness that comes when your body knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. The platoon is spread thin across the tree line. 18 men covering a position that should have 50. Half of them are replacements who've been in country less than a month. The other half are veterans who've seen too much and stopped caring about anything except surviving until the next sunrise. Nobody talks about what happens if the Germans come in force. There's nothing to say. They'll fight. They'll probably die. That's the math. The sergeant makes his rounds, checking positions, counting ammunition, doing the small things that keep men focused when there's nothing else to do. He doesn't mention the hay bales. Doesn't tell anyone except the 3 men who helped build them. The fewer people who know, the fewer people who can talk. And if the lieutenant finds out before the shooting starts, the whole thing falls apart. The morning passes. The afternoon drags. The radio crackles occasionally with routine traffic, supply requests, position reports. The bureaucratic heartbeat of an army that doesn't know it's about to be hit. The sergeant listens to every transmission, hoping for something, anything, that suggests someone higher up is paying attention. He hears nothing. At 4 in the afternoon, a runner comes up from battalion with a message. The sergeant watches the lieutenant read it, watches his face cycle through confusion, annoyance, and finally, something like relief. The lieutenant folds the paper and looks up. "Good news," he says. "Division confirms the sector is quiet. We're to maintain current posture and avoid unnecessary engagement. They're sending a resupply convoy through tomorrow." The sergeant stares at him. "Sir, with respect, I don't think we'll be here tomorrow." The lieutenant's expression hardens. "That's enough, Sergeant. I've heard your theories. Division has heard your reports. The assessment is clear. There's no major German force in this sector. Sir." "I said that's enough." The lieutenant turns away. "Get your men ready for a quiet night. That's an order." The sergeant stands there for a moment, feeling the words pile up in his throat. All the things he wants to say. All the warnings he knows won't be heard. Then he swallows them down and walks back to his foxhole. The sun sets early this time of year. By 5 o'clock, the field is already sinking into darkness, the hay bales turning into black shapes against the gray snow. The sergeant sits with his back against the frozen earth, watching the last light fade, listening to the silence that isn't quite silence, somewhere out there, beyond the tree line, beyond the valley, beyond the comfortable certainty of division headquarters. An army is moving. He can feel it the way he used to feel weather coming. A pressure in the air, a wrongness that has no name. The maps say nothing is there. The officers say nothing is there. But the maps are paper, and the officers are miles away, and paper and distance don't stop tanks. He thinks about the men in that farmhouse. Warm, fed, confident. Pushing pins across the table and deciding who lives and who dies based on information that was outdated before it was written down. They're not bad men. They're not even stupid men. They're just men who've learned to trust systems instead of eyes, procedures instead of instincts. The army runs on that trust. Most of the time, it works. But sometimes, the system breaks. Sometimes, the procedure fails. And when that happens, the men who trusted it are always the last to know. The sergeant pulls his coat tighter and settles in to wait. Across the field, the hay bales sit motionless in the dark, hiding their secrets. In a few hours, he'll find out if those secrets are enough. Right now, all he can do is watch. The temperature drops after midnight, the kind of cold that seeps through wool and leather and settles into bone. The sergeant can feel it in his fingers, his toes, the slow ache spreading through his joints. He's been in this foxhole for 6 hours, watching the darkness, and the darkness has given him nothing but silence. Around him, the platoon is trying to sleep. A few men have managed it, curled into their holes like animals, coats pulled over their heads. The rest just stare into the night, too cold or too scared to close their eyes. Nobody talks. There's nothing to say that hasn't been said 100 times already. The sergeant checks his watch. 0300. 4 hours until dawn. 4 hours of nothing but waiting and hoping he's wrong. He's not wrong. At 0330, the first sound reaches him. Faint, almost imaginary. A low rumble at the edge of hearing, like thunder that never stops. He sits up, straining to place it. The noise is coming from the east, beyond the valley, beyond the trees. It doesn't sound like weather. He crawls out of his foxhole and moves to where Kowalski is lying, behind a fallen log, watching the road. "You hear that?" Kowalski nods without turning. "Been hearing it for 10 minutes. Getting louder." The sergeant listens. The rumble is definitely closer now. Under it, he can pick out individual sounds. The grinding of treads, the growl of engines, the distant clatter of metal on metal. It's not one vehicle. It's dozens, maybe more. He moves down the line, waking men as quietly as he can. No shouting, no panic, just a hand on the shoulder and 2 words. They're coming. Some of them don't need to be told. They've already heard it. They're already reaching for their rifles, checking their ammunition, doing the small automatic things that soldiers do when the time for thinking is over. Others look at him with blank, confused faces, still half asleep, Not understanding. He doesn't explain. There's no time. By 0400, the whole platoon is awake and in position. The lieutenant is at the command post, talking frantically into a radio that keeps cutting out. The sergeant can hear fragments of the conversation, requesting confirmation, requesting support, requesting anything. The responses are garbled, broken, useless. He finds Denny near the hay bales, crouched behind a tree, staring at the field. "The MG's in place?" Denny nods. "Loaded and ready, just like you said." The sergeant looks at the bales. In the darkness, they're just shapes. Black lumps against the snow, invisible, ordinary. In a few hours, they'll either be the smartest thing he's ever done or the last mistake he ever makes. "What about the lieutenant?" Denny asks. "He know. He'll figure it out when the shooting starts. And if he tries to stop us?" The sergeant doesn't answer. There's nothing to say. If the lieutenant tries to stop them, they're all dead anyway. At least this way they have a chance. The rumble is constant now, close enough to feel in the ground, a vibration that travels up through the frozen earth and into his boots. He can see lights in the distance. Not headlights. Something dimmer, more diffuse. Flashlights maybe, or lanterns. Hundreds of them, moving through the trees on the far side of the valley like a river of fireflies. The lieutenant appears at his shoulder, face pale, voice tight. Division says they're checking the reports. They don't have confirmation of any large-scale movement. The sergeant points at the lights. "Does that look like a patrol to you, sir?" The lieutenant doesn't answer. He just stares, mouth slightly open, watching his assumptions die one by one. For a moment, the sergeant almost feels sorry for him. The man was trained to trust the system, and the system lied. Then the moment passes. "Sir, we need to get everyone into position. Standard foxholes won't hold against what's coming. But I have something that might buy us time." The lieutenant turns to look at him. "What are you talking about?" "The hay bales, sir. I modified them. Machine gun positions inside. Overlapping fields of fire on the road." The lieutenant's face goes through something complicated. Shock, anger, understanding, fear. All of it compressed into a few seconds. "You did what?" "I did what needed doing, sir. Court-martial me later. Right now, we need to decide if we're going to use them." The moment stretches. The rumble grows louder. The lights are closer now, close enough to see individual shapes moving between the trees. The lieutenant looks at the field, at the bales, at the sergeant. Then something in him breaks. Not in a bad way, but in the way a wall breaks when you finally stop trying to hold it up. "Show me," he says. The sergeant nods. He doesn't waste time on "I told you so." There's no room for it now. He leads the lieutenant to the edge of the tree line, points out the positions, explains the angles, the timing, the plan. The lieutenant listens without interrupting. When the sergeant finishes, the lieutenant is quiet for a long moment. "If this doesn't work," he says finally, "we're all dead." "If we do nothing, we're all dead anyway." The lieutenant nods slowly. "All right, all right." He takes a breath, and when he speaks again, his voice is steadier. "Get your men into position. I'll handle the foxholes. We hold as long as we can." The sergeant salutes. For once, it doesn't feel like a formality. The next 30 minutes are controlled chaos. Men moving through darkness, finding positions, checking weapons. Kowalski and Denny slide into the hay bales, disappearing into the hollowed-out spaces like they were never there. The sergeant takes the third bale himself, the one closest to the road, the one that will fire first. He settles into the cramped space, feeling the rough straw against his back, the cold metal of the machine gun under his hands. Through the firing slit, he can see the road, a strip of pale mud stretching into the darkness, empty and waiting. The rumble fills the world now. It's not a sound anymore. It's a presence, a weight pressing down on everything. He can hear voices in the distance, German commands shouted over the noise of engines. They're close. So close. He puts his finger on the trigger and waits. The farm kid from Kansas, alone in a hay bale, about to fight a war that his own army doesn't believe is happening. This is the moment. Everything else was just getting here. The first vehicle appears at 0517. A Kübelwagen moving slowly, headlights dimmed to slits. Scout car, checking the road ahead for the column behind it. The sergeant watches it through the firing slit, tracking its progress across the field. 50 yards, 40, 30. He doesn't move, doesn't breathe. The Kübelwagen rolls past his position, close enough that he can hear the driver shifting gears, close enough to see the glow of a cigarette in the passenger seat. It passes, keeps going, disappears up the road toward the ridge. Let them go. One scout car isn't worth revealing the position. The column is what matters. He waits. The column comes 3 minutes later. First, the half-tracks. Boxy, dark shapes grinding up the road in a slow procession. Then the trucks, canvas-covered, packed with infantry. Then more half-tracks. Then something bigger, something heavier. The unmistakable silhouette of armor. Not tanks, assault guns maybe, or armored cars. Hard to tell in the dark. It doesn't matter. Whatever they are, there are too many of them. The sergeant starts counting. 10 vehicles. 20, 30. The column stretches back into the darkness like a metal snake, and he can't see the end of it. 500 men, the report said. Looking at it now, that number feels optimistic. He finds the lead half-track in his sights, waits until it's centered in the slit, waits until he can see the driver's face, pale and bored, expecting nothing. Then, he pulls the trigger. The MG-42 tears the silence apart. The first burst catches the half-track's cab dead center. Glass shattering, metal sparking. The driver slumping forward over the wheel. The vehicle swerves, clips a hay bale and grinds to a stop in the middle of the road. Behind it, brakes scream. Trucks slam into each other. Men start shouting. Kowalski opens up a half-second later, his position raking the stalled convoy from the left flank. Then Denny, from the right. 3 streams of tracer fire converging on the road, turning the column into a kill zone. The Germans react fast, faster than the sergeant expected. Within seconds, soldiers are spilling out of trucks, diving for cover, returning fire. But they're shooting at the tree line, at the foxholes up the ridge, at everywhere except the hay bales. They don't understand what's hitting them. They can't see it. A soldier sprints toward the sergeant's position, looking for cover behind a hay bale that looks solid and safe. He's 3 feet away when the sergeant shifts his aim and cuts him down. Another one tries the same thing on Kowalski's side. Same result. The beautiful, terrible logic of the trap is working. The hay bales are part of the landscape. The Germans have been walking past bales like these for months. In France, in Belgium, in every farm field from Normandy to the Rhine. They don't see weapons. They see scenery. And by the time they figure out the difference, they're already dead. But the trap can't hold forever. The sergeant knows this. He's known it from the beginning. 3 machine guns can't stop an army. All they can do is slow it down, bloody its nose, buy time for something else to happen. The question is, how much time and at what cost? The first mortar round lands at 0524, close enough to spray frozen dirt across his position, close enough to make his ears ring and his vision blur. The Germans have figured out the approximate location of the fire. They can't see the hay bales, but they can see the muzzle flashes, and that's enough. Another round, closer. The bale shudders, and he hears straw tearing somewhere above his head. He keeps firing. On the road, the column is a mess. Burning vehicles blocking the path forward. Dead men scattered across the mud. But more men are pouring out of the trucks, spreading into the field, starting to move around the flanks. They're not beaten. They're just adapting. A burst of fire rips through the hay bale to his left. Kowalski's position. He hears a scream, short and sharp. Then nothing. He can't check. Can't help. All he can do is keep shooting and hope. The lieutenant's voice crackles over the radio. broken and desperate. "All positions report. What's your status? Is anyone receiving?" The sergeant ignores it. There's nothing to report that the lieutenant can't hear for himself. The ridge is lit up like daylight, muzzle flashes and explosions, painting the darkness in orange and white. The foxholes are firing now, adding their rifles to the chaos. But it's not enough. It was never going to be enough. A shape looms out of the smoke. One of the assault guns, pushing through the wreckage, shoving a burning half-track aside like it weighs nothing. The sergeant swings his MG toward it, knowing it's pointless, knowing the bullets will bounce off the armor like rain. He fires anyway. The assault gun's cannon traverses, stops. The muzzle is pointing directly at him. He has time for one thought. This is it. Before the world explodes. The round doesn't hit the hay bale. It hits the ground 6 feet in front of it, close enough to lift him off his feet and slam him against the back of the hollowed space. His ears are gone, replaced by a high-pitched whine that drowns out everything else. His hands are still on the gun, but he can't feel them. He can't feel anything. He lies there in the straw and the dirt and the ringing silence, staring at the sky through a hole that wasn't there before. Smoke, stars. The flicker of flames somewhere out of sight. He should be dead. He's not sure why he isn't. Then, slowly, the world starts coming back. Sound first, gunfire, shouting, the grinding of engines. Then feeling, pain in his shoulder, pain in his ribs, the wet warmth of blood somewhere he can't identify. He rolls onto his stomach, pulls himself toward the firing slit, and looks out. The road is chaos. The column has stalled completely. Vehicles piled up behind the wreckage. Men running in every direction. Some are still fighting, still pushing toward the ridge. Others are pulling back, dragging wounded, trying to regroup. The assault gun that nearly killed him is burning. Someone in the foxholes must have gotten lucky with a bazooka round. He looks for Kowalski's bale. It's shredded, torn apart by mortar fire, nothing left but scattered straw and splintered wood. He looks for Denny's. Still there. Still firing. 1 gun left out of 3. The sergeant pulls himself back to his machine gun. The barrel is hot enough to burn through his gloves. The ammunition belt is down to the last 100 rounds. His vision keeps blurring, and he's pretty sure at least 2 of his ribs are broken. He starts shooting again. The next hour is a blur. Fragments of memory disconnected and strange. The sound of a German voice, very close, shouting orders he can't understand. A flare going up, turning the field into a photograph of hell. Denny's gun going silent, then starting again, then going silent for good. The lieutenant on the radio, screaming for artillery support that isn't coming. And through all of it, the simple mechanical act of firing, reloading, firing again. Not thinking, not hoping, just doing the only thing left to do. Dawn comes slowly, gray light bleeding across a gray sky. The sergeant is still in the hay bale, still alive, still holding a gun that hasn't fired in 20 minutes because there's nothing left to fire. The road is quiet. The Germans have pulled back. Not defeated, just delayed. They'll find another route, another way around. The offensive will continue. But not here. Not through this field. Not tonight. He crawls out of the hay bale and stands for the first time in 4 hours. His legs almost give out. He catches himself on the ruined straw, breathing hard, looking at what's left of his ambush. 2 bales destroyed, 1 barely standing. Kowalski is dead. He finds the body 50 feet from the position, thrown clear by the mortar round that killed him. Denny is alive, but barely, slumped against a tree with a bandage pressed to his stomach, eyes glassy and far away. Up on the ridge, the platoon is counting its own dead. 7 men gone out of 18. More wounded, ammunition nearly exhausted. They've been chewed up and spit out. And the only reason any of them are breathing is that the Germans decided to go around instead of through. The sergeant stands in the middle of the field, surrounded by burning vehicles and scattered bodies, and the shattered remains of a farm kid's stupid idea. They held. God help them. They actually held. The lieutenant finds him sitting on what's left of a hay bale, staring at nothing. The officer's uniform is torn. His face is streaked with powder burns, and he's limping from something that happened during the fight. He sits down next to the sergeant without asking permission. For a long time, neither of them speaks. Finally, the lieutenant says, "Your idea worked." The sergeant doesn't look at him. Kowalski's dead. "I know. Denny's not going to make it. I know." The lieutenant pulls out a cigarette, lights it with shaking hands, takes a long drag. Then he offers it to the sergeant. The sergeant takes it. They pass it back and forth in silence, watching the smoke rise into the gray morning air. The radio crackles. The lieutenant stands, walks over to answer it. The sergeant watches him go, watches him pick up the handset, watches his face change as he listens. When he comes back, he looks older. "Division wants a report," the lieutenant says. "Full accounting of enemy forces, casualties, disposition. They want to know what happened. Tell them what happened." The lieutenant shakes his head. "They don't believe it. They're saying we overestimated the size of the column. That it was probably a reconnaissance in force, not a full assault. They want to know why we engaged instead of withdrawing." The sergeant turns to look at him. "Because we didn't have anywhere to withdraw to." The lieutenant nods. "I told them that." He pauses. "I also told them about the hay bales. About what you did. And they asked if it was a pre-approved defensive modification. If it had been cleared by the chain of command." The sergeant laughs. It's a bitter sound. No humor in it. "What did you tell them?" The lieutenant meets his eyes. "I told them it was my idea, that I authorized it." The sergeant stares at him. "Sir, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Because if I don't, they'll string you up for disobeying orders in combat. And after what you just did, after what you just saved, I'm not letting that happen." The sergeant doesn't know what to say to that, so he says nothing. Just nods once and turns back to watch the field. The medics arrive at 0700, brought up in trucks that somehow found a way through the mess. They load Denny onto a stretcher. He's unconscious, face white, breathing shallow. The sergeant watches them carry him away and knows he'll never see him again. Kowalski gets a poncho and a tag tied to his boot. He'll go in a truck with the others. 5 more from the platoon. 2 from the company that was supposed to be supporting them but never showed. The sergeant helps load the bodies. It's the least he can do. It's the only thing he can do. By noon, a staff officer arrives from regiment. Clean uniform, polished boots, clipboard in hand. He walks the field like a tourist, taking notes, asking questions that show he doesn't understand what he's looking at. He stops at the destroyed hay bales, frowns, writes something down. He finds the sergeant sitting with the survivors. "What were these for?" he asks, pointing at the bales. "Ambush positions," the sergeant says. "Machine gun nests." The officer frowns harder. "That's not standard doctrine." "No, sir." "Did it work?" The sergeant looks at the road, at the burned-out vehicles still smoking in the morning light. "What do you think, sir?" The officer writes something else on his clipboard. "We'll need to include this in the after-action report." He pauses. "Although, I'm not sure how to classify it. Improvised fortification? Field modification?" "How about it saved our lives?" the sergeant says. The officer looks uncomfortable. "Yes. Well, that's not really a doctrinal category." He leaves 20 minutes later, driving back to wherever staff officers go when they're done pretending to understand war. The sergeant watches him go and feels something cold settle in his chest. He knows what's coming. He's seen it before. The report will be written by people who weren't there, approved by people who didn't believe it could happen, and filed away by people who don't care. And in that report, the hay bales will be a footnote at best. An embarrassment at worst. The platoon is pulled off the line 3 days later. They're folded into another unit, their equipment distributed, Their positions filled by fresh troops who don't know what happened here and don't ask. The sergeant gets a Bronze Star for valor, presented by a colonel who reads the citation off a card and mispronounces his name. There's no mention of hay bales. No mention of ignored warnings. Just 3 sentences about determined defense in the face of overwhelming enemy forces. He accepts it without comment, pins it to his uniform, never looks at it again. A week after the battle, the official report comes down from division. The sergeant never sees it, but the lieutenant does, and he tells him what it says. Enemy reconnaissance in force repelled by effective defensive fire. Estimated enemy strength. Company-sized element, approximately 150 men. Light vehicles, no armor. American casualties, light. Sector held. The sergeant listens to this without expression. Then he asks, "What about the column, the half-tracks? The assault gun?" The lieutenant shakes his head. Not mentioned. Division assessment is that we overestimated in the heat of battle. Understandable under the circumstances. What about the hay bales? Brief reference to improvised field positions. No details, no names. The sergeant is quiet for a long moment. Then he says, "They're calling us liars." "No, they're calling us mistaken." "It's different." "Is it?" The lieutenant doesn't answer. There's nothing to say. The sergeant doesn't talk about the hay bales. Not after the war. Not when he gets home to Kansas and his father asks what it was like. Not when he sits in the VFW hall 30 years later, drinking beer with men who understand without needing details. Some stories are too complicated to tell to people who weren't there. Some stories hurt too much to waste on people who won't believe them anyway. He goes back to the farm. Marries a girl from the next county over. Has 3 kids who grow up hearing that their father was in the war, but never hearing what he did there. He stacks hay every summer, the same way he did before. And sometimes his hands remember the feeling of frozen straw and blood, and he has to stop for a minute until the memory passes. He never throws away the Bronze Star, but he never hangs it up either. It stays in a drawer with his discharge papers and a photograph of men who didn't come home. The years pass. 1968, 1975, 1983. The war becomes history. Then the history becomes documentaries. Then the documentaries become background noise. The same stories told the same way until nobody's listening anymore. Hitler and D-Day and the flag at Iwo Jima. The Bulge gets mentioned. Bastogne, McAuliffe, the siege that everyone knows. The rest of it blurs together into generic heroism and vague sacrifice. Nobody asks about a frozen field in Belgium. Nobody asks about hay. In 1992, the sergeant gets a letter. It's from a graduate student in Michigan working on a thesis about small unit actions in the Ardennes. She's found his name in some archive, some casualty report cross-referenced with a unit roster. She's wondering if he'd be willing to talk. He almost throws the letter away, but something stops him. Maybe the fact that she's asking. Maybe the fact that nobody else ever has. He writes back. 3 pages in cramped handwriting. The first time he's put any of it into words. He tells her about the ghost front, the ignored warnings, the hay bales built in secret. He tells her about Kowalski and Denny and the lieutenant who lied to save him from a court-martial. He tells her everything except how it felt, because feelings don't translate to paper. She writes back with more questions. He answers them. This goes on for months. Letters crossing in the mail, a conversation across decades, and distance about a night that lasted 4 hours and changed nothing and everything. In 1994, she finishes her thesis. She sends him a copy. He reads it twice. It's strange, seeing his life turned into footnotes and citations and academic language, but it's there, all of it. The truth, as close as anyone's gotten. The thesis doesn't change anything. It sits in a university library in Michigan where maybe 12 people read it. The official histories stay the same. But at least it exists. At least someone wrote it down. In 1997, there's a reunion. Not a big one. Just 7 men from the original platoon. The ones still alive. The ones who can still travel. They meet in a hotel outside D.C., and for 3 days, they don't talk about the war at all. They talk about grandkids and bad knees, and whether the Orioles have any chance this year. On the last night, someone brings it up: the ridge, the field, the bales. For an hour, nobody speaks. Then someone says, "I thought I dreamed that. I thought maybe I made it up, made it crazier than it was." Someone else says, "No, it was that crazy." And then they all start talking at once, interrupting each other, correcting details, laughing at things that weren't funny then and aren't funny now, but somehow need to be laughed at anyway. They talk until 2 in the morning, and when they finally stop, something has shifted. The silence doesn't feel as heavy. The sergeant tells them about the graduate student, about the thesis. One of the men, the lieutenant, retired now, living in Florida, says he kept copies of everything: the reports, the radio logs, the casualty lists. He's been holding on to them for 50 years, not sure why, just knowing they mattered. "Maybe we should do something with this," someone says. "Maybe people should know." "Maybe," the sergeant says. But he doesn't believe it. In 2001, a military historian finds the thesis. He's writing a book about overlooked actions in World War II. And this story fits perfectly. The ignored warnings, the improvised defense, the way headquarters dismissed what they couldn't understand. He contacts the sergeant, now 79 years old, barely able to walk, hands shaking from something the doctors can't name. They talk for 6 hours. The historian records all of it. The book comes out in 2003. It gets decent reviews, makes a few bestseller lists. The sergeant's story is 1 chapter out of 12. The Bale ambush, when doctrine failed on the Ghost Front. 18 pages, photographs, maps, a sidebar about improvised fortifications and their effectiveness when properly employed. It's more than he expected, less than they deserved. The Army takes notice. In 2004, 59 years after the battle, the platoon receives a Presidential Unit citation. The ceremony is small, respectful, attended by 3 surviving members and the families of the rest. A general reads a speech about valor and initiative and the finest traditions of American arms. The citation itself mentions effective use of terrain and improvised defensive positions. It does not use the word "hey." The sergeant accepts it on behalf of the men who aren't there to accept it themselves. Kowalski, Denny, who died in a VA hospital in 1968. All the others, gone to time and age and wars that followed. He thinks about what he'd say if anyone asked him what it meant, but nobody asks. They shake his hand, thank him for his service, take photographs. Then it's over. He dies in 2006, 84 years old, heart attack, quick and clean. His family finds the Bronze Star in the drawer, along with the thesis, the book, the citation. They donate it all to a museum that promises to preserve it. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. It doesn't matter much either way. The official history of the Ardennes offensive is 3 volumes, published by the Army in 1965. The battle at the ridge is mentioned on page 472, 3 sentences. Wow. In the northern sector, a small American force delayed enemy advance elements for several hours before withdrawing. This action contributed to the overall disruption of German timetables in the opening phase. Casualties were light on both sides. No names, no details. No hey. That's the version that gets taught in staff colleges. That's the version that shows up in documentaries. That's the version that historians cite when they talk about how the Ardennes offensive unfolded. A delay, a disruption. A footnote in the larger story of a battle that was itself a footnote in the larger story of a war. But here's what that version doesn't say. Doesn't even try to say. It doesn't say that a farm kid from Kansas saw what was coming and nobody believed him. It doesn't say that he built something that saved lives because the people in charge wouldn't. It doesn't say that the men at headquarters spent the entire battle insisting it wasn't happening. even as the radio screamed proof that it was. It doesn't say that after it was over, they wrote a report that made themselves right and everyone else mistaken. It doesn't say that the distance between the front line and the command post isn't measured in miles. It's measured in understanding, in experience, in the gap between knowing something because you read it and knowing something because you lived it. The generals moved pins on a map. The sergeant moved hay bales in a field. And for one night, in one corner of a war that killed millions, the hay mattered more than all the pins in all the headquarters in Europe. This is the part they don't teach. This is the part that gets lost in the official histories and the after-action reports and the three-sentence summaries that turn human beings into statistics. The part where the people who fight the war aren't the same people who remember it, where the truth gets filed away and forgotten because it doesn't fit the story someone else decided to tell. The sergeant knew this. All the men on that ridge knew this. They knew it the moment the first report came back with the word ghosts. They knew it when they loaded Kowalski onto a truck. They knew it when they read the citation that erased what they'd done and replaced it with something cleaner, simpler, easier to explain. But they also knew something else. They knew that on one frozen night in December, when every system failed and every authority was wrong, a few exhausted men with straw in their hands and fear in their hearts held a line that wasn't supposed to hold. Not because anyone told them to, not because it was in the manual, but because someone had to, and because sometimes that's all war is. The moment when someone has to, and does. The hay bales are gone now, rotted away, plowed under. The field is just a field again, somewhere in Belgium, probably growing wheat or corn, worked by farmers who have no idea what happened there. But the gap is still there. The gap between the line and the headquarters, between the men who see and the men who decide, between the truth and the report. And in that gap, all the wars that matter are still being fought.